Emilio Fede died on Tuesday at the age of 94, closing the chapter of one of the most controversial, beloved, and criticized figures in the history of Italian journalism and television. His daughter Sveva confirmed the news to Corriere della Sera, noting only hours before that her father was still fighting like a lion, calling him a warrior in the truest sense. His funeral, which is set to take place at the Dio Padre parish in Milan 2 Seagrate, will not just be the farewell to a man, but to an era of television that he helped create, shape, and distort in ways that remain unforgettable. His death leaves behind memories, gaffes, battles, and a career that fused journalism, theater, politics, and spectacle into a single figure who never shied away from the spotlight, even when that spotlight burned. Just a few months ago, in July, rumors began circulating online that Emilio Fede had already died. When asked about it, the veteran journalist laughed it off with the casualness of someone who had grown accustomed to seeing his name written in premature obituaries. "Again, I'm used to it and I'm not superstitious," he said with a shrug, carrying the irony of someone who lived his whole life under both praise and ridicule. Now, however, the news is final. Fede is truly gone. He had turned 94 on June 24th, a milestone birthday for a man who was, for decades, the embodiment of television itself. He was more than a journalist. He was an entertainer, a political soldier, a loyalist, a target for mockery, and ultimately, a symbol of the Italian television that blurred the line between information and performance. Fede was, above all else, an inventor of a genre of journalism so openly biased, so colored by theatrical exaggeration and partisanship, that it became not just tolerated but consumed as entertainment. In a way, he transformed news into a performance art that could be adored, hated, laughed at, or criticized, but never ignored. He was a champion of television in every sense of the word. He brought news into commercial television when no one else thought it was possible. And on public television, he created what would later be called the TV of pain, a phrase that encapsulated his ability to transform tragedy into collective spectacle. This was most evident in 1981, during one of his most defining broadcasts. An 18-hour live coverage from Vermicino, where a young boy, Alfredino Rampi, had fallen into a well. Fede intended to narrate the story of a rescue and a miraculous happy ending. Instead, what unfolded was the slow, devastating reality of a child's death. The nation watched in real time, glued to their screens as the attempted rescue turned into tragedy. Fede later admitted it was one of the worst tragedies I've ever covered, even though he had reported from war zones and natural disasters as a RAI correspondent. That moment, though tragic, cemented his understanding of how television could grip, move, and bind an entire country together in a single shared experience. Before those moments of theatrical news, Fede had lived the life of a serious journalist. For 8 years, he traveled across 40 countries as a RAI correspondent, covering wars, disasters, and international crises. His reports carried him from the front lines of conflicts to the aftermath of catastrophes, shaping him into someone who knew that the truth was not always neat, nor was it always triumphant. That experience gave him credibility, but it also gave him a taste for the drama of events, a flair that would later evolve into his signature television style. He went on to become director of TG1, a role that marked his transition from correspondent to figurehead. Then came 1989, the turning point that linked his destiny with that of Silvio Berlusconi, Italy's most polarizing media mogul and political figure. It was, for Fede, an epiphany. For Berlusconi, it was the discovery of the perfect herald. Fede became more than just a journalist. He became Berlusconi's bard, the voice and face of Fininvest's newscasts, the man who could take political propaganda and make it palatable to millions of viewers. In 1991, on Studio Aperto, he was the first to break the news of the Gulf War in Italy. Years later, he would also be the first to announce the capture of Saddam Hussein on television. In between, he became notorious for one of the most legendary gaffes in Italian broadcasting history, introducing what was supposed to be the first image of Saddam Hussein. Fede dramatically told viewers, "And now I'll show you the first image of this ferocious assassin." But the control room mistakenly projected a photo of Silvio Berlusconi. Without missing a beat, Fede exclaimed, "What a figure of me." The slip became iconic, a moment he himself loved to retell. It captured his philosophy of television. Perfection wasn't necessary. What mattered was the impression left behind. Long before the age of social media, Emilio Fede understood that visibility and memorability outweighed accuracy. He once said of himself, "I was the most criticized director, but also the most watched." Perhaps his most enduring legacy came with TG4, founded in 1992. Under Fede's direction, it became more than just a news program. It became a genre in itself. It was unabashedly partisan, openly theatrical, and at times verging on caricature. For his critics, it was propaganda disguised as journalism. For his admirers, it was courage. The courage to say out loud what others only hinted at. One of his most infamous broadcasts took place during elections. With polls still open, Fede declared, "Since it's forbidden to talk about politics while voting, I'll just remind you that today we are called to choose between poverty and freedom, between that communist Prodi and the great, wonderful Silvio Berlusconi." Lines like that solidified his reputation as Berlusconi's loyalist, willing to bend the rules, if not outright break them, to serve the cause. Most Italians will remember him for this legendary devotion to Berlusconi, a loyalty that seemed unshakable, even as scandals, criticisms, and changing times reshaped the media landscape. To some, Fede's fidelity made him a tragic figure, a man who tied his professional identity so closely to one political figure that he could never escape the shadow of Il Cavaliere. Yet, in another sense, he should be recognized for the brazen honesty of it. He never pretended neutrality. He never cloaked his bias in faux objectivity. He put his cards on the table, living proof of the paradoxical truth in Italian media. What others hypocritically denied, Emilio Fede shamelessly embraced. His story begins much earlier, though in Barcelona, Pozzo di Gotto, Sicily, where he was born in 1931. The son of a carabinieri brigadier decorated with a medal for military valor and an opera singer mother, Fede grew up in a household marked by discipline and performance, a combination that foreshadowed his own career. From a young age, he gravitated toward journalism, beginning his career at Il Messaggero. One of his first scoops was hardly glamorous, delivering handwritten notes for a speech by trade unionist Giuseppe Di Vittorio to the newspaper's editorial office. But it was a start, and Fede knew that in journalism, small beginnings could pave the way to big opportunities. He joined RAI in 1961, where he began to climb the ranks. But his journey was far from smooth. Fede struggled with personal demons, including a turbulent relationship with gambling that led to trials and an eventual acquittal. These struggles could have derailed him, but instead, they added layers to his persona. He was not just a polished anchor. He was a flawed, human figure with vulnerabilities that, paradoxically, seemed to make his bravado on television even more convincing.